and the elimination of these, I think, is potentially like an interesting place to start thinking about the kinds of conversations we have in our everyday lives and how we interact with popular culture, even children's popular culture. I mentioned right before Beryl and Christine came on that my students are always very interested in the figure of the witch and what the figure of the witch represents, because it's so much a part of the popular culture that's been normal for them. Yeah, I'll just read a little bit. The second paragraph there on 168. If we return to the trivialized world of popular culture, we see that the popularity of witches has grown from television series to coven squads to street protests. Recent revivals of magic occult actions proliferate, such as the Witch Block, the Witches of Bushwick, and the frequent networked hexing of Donald Trump while he was U.S. president and is again. In response to being accused of witchery, Gretchen Whitmer tweeted a picture of herself with West's book. Black girl magic has come to the foreground in digital compositional spheres, a force to counter misogynoir and to shape practices of self-definition. We are the granddaughters of the witches you could not burn is plastered in the chants and on signs, reviving herbalists, midwives, doctors, and healers who had their knowledges and their lives expropriated. And I have this next line highlighted. Witches activate the ambivalence in autogenetic sovereignty by recirculating what was excluded. Like the autogenetic sovereign, witches also flee, but differently. Amani Perry speaks of how Alice Walker's witches, saints, and grandmothers were unbound from their vestibularity. They could see beyond it, fly above it, and scatter themselves. Their transcendence involves herb-induced rites and night flight reveries to other worlds. These flights constitute a different departure and return. Via the broomstick and flying ointment, they leave their confines as resistance to housewifeization in order to survive, reconnect with support networks, and compose their collective powers. Just one more paragraph and then I'll pause. The witch's history is a history of cunning craft. Cunning craft here refers to folk knowledges, skills, and powers from the German Kraft that comprise the magical practices of healing and survival tactics. It is this cunning craft that Maria Mies notes was the target of dispossession in the witch hunts and that becomes anathema in contemporary ecclesiastical counter-feminisms. Coded as feminine, cunning craft respects the immanence of life's processes and harnesses them through circulation. It does not practice out of fear, but it does not flee, and it does not flee due to potential dissolution of a self's boundaries. Maybe one more. Okay, well, I'll just finish these last two paragraphs before he gets to the specific case study then of WITCH. Yeah, this is good. So in the late 1960s in the US and elsewhere, cunning craft was central to the composition of feminist intellectuality via peer transmission of analysis and know-how. I think one of the questions Jack's focus on feminism and feminisms as anti-microfascism begs is what is the status of feminism at the moment? Like what is and where is a militant moment in feminism and a militantly anti-fascist moment in feminism, if that's emerging somewhere, if that's part of nascent feminist movements. My students have trouble with questions like this because my students have trouble sort of naming a feminist idea that sort of resonates with a room full of students who might be thinking along these lines. So I wonder if we don't have if there's not a movement to generate a concept of kind of a militant position within feminism at the moment, or just where that stands. So in the late 1960s, so what is the status today is what this begs, I think. In the late 1960s in the US and elsewhere, cunning craft was central to the composition of feminist intellectuality via peer transmission of analysis and know-how. Collective cunning craft generated theoretical and practical tools to understand gender and power, patriarchy, but also intersections with racism, imperialism, capitalism, heteronormativity. It gave names to experiences like domestic violence, battery of wives, and sexual harassment. We saw the multiplication of feminist educational institutions, workshops, study groups, conferences, collaborative writing and publishing projects, journals, course packets, books, media production, biopolitical information transmission, and underground support networks. The metis, the movement of the concrete in cunning craft form, or the metis, is one basis for the permanence of collective feminist potentia materialized. While micro-fascist machines appear and reappear, their devastation is historical, provisional, and unsustainable. The ongoing production of the witch subject attests to this ancient and modern resistance. So in some ways, the figure of the witch and witchcraft is stronger and deeper than the fascist war machine, which is a fun little echo, I think, of maybe like a Hart and Negri kind of argument, right? That like capitalism is always trying to capture what exceeds capitalism. So like kind of reversing the idea that capitalism subsumes everything and we try to resist it, but like the opposite, right? Like witchcraft is always beating up on fascism, and fascism is always trying to catch up to witchcraft. Is kind of the reversal here, I think, right? And sometimes it's more successful, but it's always, witchcraft is always there and it's never going away. And fascism sometimes expends itself trying to fight it off. Any thoughts about any of that? Or like, I mean, that's one way to think about, I mentioned in the email too, this, what I feel like was the animating discussion at the very beginning of like political economy versus culture. And this is another sort of example where Jack's tendency to think trans historically, I think, sort of asserts itself. And he sees something about witchcraft being not just tied to a resistance to capitalism that becomes a resistance to fascism, but that there's something sort of, historically, that kind of exceeds the political economic moment of capitalism that we can draw off of. But I don't know, any thoughts?
Well, I used to know a lot of good witches, so you know, it's a long time since those days. I wish they would come back. You know, there used to be a great culture of that. I remember growing up, especially in the late '60s and in the '70s. You know, there was actually someone in the East Village who was called the Witch, and she had a place, and people would go there to, you know, foretell their future. She was very anti-capitalist. She had costumes and everything. So it became kind of like a performative moment, you know, on down on St. Mark's Street, if people know the East Village at all, back in the day. So anyway, just an aside here, but yeah, I mean, this is very interesting stuff that, you know, you had at the same time Call Off Your Old Tired Ethics, Coyote, happening with Margot St. James at the same time in terms of prostitution, right? She was San Francisco Madam who performed this. So you had many of these groups that started to form. I get for me the question is, what's going on today? You know, in the sense of this kind of craft, you know, that he speaks about. You know, this is great stuff, and it's great stuff that we can talk about and engage. But then the question is, yes, where would it operate in some ways? You know, and how does it function again as a truly resistant moment, right? You know, instead of just being another pocket that we're very fond of, or to put it in Negre and Arch terms, all of this can be subsumed under multitude as agency. But that's so vast and it's so great, in my opinion. So again, I'm just, you know, throwing out that question too. Yeah, and not to romanticize this either, you know, because he deals with this later too. But you know, yeah. You know, I used to have I mean, she's in London now, grown lady, but I used to take her to the East Village. She'd always want, can we go see the witch? Can we go see the witch? Yeah, this is what she would want to do. So anyway, yeah. So yeah.
Does anybody popular? Just a popular culture question. Does anybody have in mind examples of the development and like changes of representations of witches and witchcraft over time? Like I encourage my students to think, for example, of like classic Disney films versus the more recent stuff, and they think about like, you know, Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty and Frozen, and like you know, the different ways that and I wonder, Michael, to your example, like and to Jack's example, the decades of the 1960s, how these things develop, how like a figure of resistance sort of emerges, is incorporated into popular culture, reemerges as something resistant, is reincorporated into popular culture. So I don't know if are there any particularly horrible examples of the way like the figure of a witch in popular culture. I haven't seen the Wickeds, for example. Like I don't quite know how the Wickeds work, but it strikes me that the Wickeds are a really good one here because so many young people, especially, have seen the Wickeds and have grown up with like the Wicked films and Wicked on Broadway as like their image of the witch. I wonder how things have shifted over time, and like how was what we were seeing in popular culture in the '60s when there was some like actual militant politics organized around some thoughts of the witch and things like that.
Well, it's a very prescient figure in Frank Baum's Wizard of Oz, that was 1896 he wrote it. He was a socialist who wrote the Wizard of Oz. Of course, the Oz was the ounce of gold. It was the silver crisis. William Jennings Bryan said in that moment. And the play is replete with symbolism. That's another thing too, because we've talked a little bit, most of the people that are here, about Stiegler's notion of what part of the symbolic misery is the inability to put together symbolic, symbols coming together of things and read it symbolically in terms of both historical meaning and actual practice today. So this is a problem. I haven't seen the new one. I know it's up, and there was a great program for those of you in New York, and you can actually get it on the archive from Democracy Now. Occasionally, I do tune in. I see who the guests are, or whatever. But the whole day, I think it was Christmas Day, was devoted to the songwriters. Yip Hartung, right, and of the Wizard of Oz, and how much they were into transforming people's lives during that period. So I guess all of us grew up with Tales of Dorothy, going
Yeah.
back to Kansas, in many ways. Again, I mean, I think to me the real question here fundamentally is again the question of transmission. How do you keep something as fertile and as substantive as it was in the 1950s and 60s for today, and be able to translate that to this generation coming up. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think this is a really fundamental issue. One of the reasons we have so much fascism is we've lost that ability to read things, symbols, historically in education. I mean, I just read in the New York Times, this is again a symptom. I have an old friend who teaches at the New College. She's a very adept philosophy. She worked on both Hannah Arendt, Simone de Beauvoir, others. She's a classicist, ancient Greek. She ended up marrying a friend of mine, friend of Miguel Botter's too, Beryl. Her name is April Flunky, and she was interviewed because of DeSantis taking over the new college, the private school that was created like a Hampshire college in Florida. And she's now saying, well, I haven't taught the Odyssey for a year, but now I'm required to teach it. So the new right and their takeover of education wants to go back to these Greek classics. The question is, how do you go back to them, right? In some ways, are you going to read alongside the Odysseus and the myth of enlightenment, of Adorno and Horkheimer? Are you going to read, Moses Finley's The World of Odysseus alongside of it? What does the word Odyssey really mean? How does it take shape, etc. So these for me are very fundamental questions of, materiality in both language and in practice, right, going forward. And yeah, and again, I mean, Jack, the research is phenomenal here, about how many groups, I thought I was adept at knowing the cultural scenes of this period, but, there are many things that I've learned very new about some of these groups that formed in the 1960s and 70s. But the question is, where is these, if you want to look at it again, the left has always had great critical skills, right? Yeah. The problem, once again, critical analytical skills. The problem again is the prescriptive, right? Where do you go? What do we do with this again? And so the perpetual question, what is to be done, right? Or, where where do we go from here? And you're right. I mean, the students would, yes, you could begin a discussion. I would go to Broadway and see the play if I thought it would, and spend the $125 that basic. I'm being,
Movie would be cheaper, Michael.
I'm on the cheap. I know.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
What comes to my mind, sorry if I've interrupted,
No, it's okay. Please.
is here in the Vancouver and in other centers in Canada, I think that Indigenous communities are having a greater impact and going back to the old teachings, and there's a huge revival underway. And at least a few years ago and before COVID, there were a lot of left thinkers who were engaging with Indigenous communities, and that's carried on. And with their support of their resistance movements and land claims issues and that sort of stuff, and empowering medicine women in those communities, and the work that they were doing. And anyway, that gives me a little bit of hope to go back to some of those some of the ethics and motivations, and maybe there's something there to help us. They're very involved in the issues of climate change and trying to, resistance against gas lines and whatnot. It's difficult, incredibly difficult, and they've been bought off all the way along the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which is now being doubled. I guess they've got all the treaties now signed. So at least there's something going back to those communities, some funds going back to those communities to help with development and whatnot. Still, I mean, we are racing to, tear up the land and cut down the trees and
that's the
destroy.
massive contradiction, I mean,
It is.
you'll pay off and they'll be happy for a moment, right?
Exactly.
You can build casinos, you can build, trading posts.
It must be terrible to the psyches,
Yes.
and the internecine warfare that must be going on among the generations there.
And it takes away from the resistance that was there to begin with. The resistance is being bought, in that regard, right? And
I think it's capitalism. That's my guess.
something like that.
No
Yeah.
shit.
Yeah. Maybe we ought to go into eco-terrorism next as the real, right.
Oh, that's been tried here too. That's
No,
for
I'm
certain.
well aware. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
One of the things that has been kind of circling in my somewhat sort of foggy mind is this whole idea of cunning and the way it is used against marginalized groups. Like Jews are supposed to be cunning. In Australia, Chinese are supposed to be cunning. Now, if women are also cunning, it seems to me that it's basically an embracing of a subordinate position, which is, I mean, I can't quite figure out where to go with this, but I think there's an issue around cunning and where it leads us socially, because it's one of the ways in which people are othered quite routinely. Now, I guess that can always be turned around as a positive. We can embrace it, but I think it's worth thinking about.
Well, cunning, I mean, I think you really raised a great point again, going back to language. If it's referring to the Jews, it's usually about the cunning of accumulation of capital.
Of
right?
course,
In some ways,
yes.
right? Number one.
Yeah.
Then
And-
number
and-
two,
and with the
women
Chinese.
manipulative. Yeah, I'm sorry, please. Yeah.
Yeah, also the Chinese, right through Southeast Asia
That's correct.
and here in Australia.
Right.
It's definitely cunning in relation to material accumulation.
So, and also it's a phrase from Hegel that has an enormous resonance, the cunning of reason. It's
Uh-huh.
right too. The craft of reasoning. if you want to look at it that way. Hegel uses this term often in the philosophy of right and also in the psychology of spirit, the cunning of reason. Yeah, yeah. That reason does not just show itself in a linear, trajectory or in a always logical sense, right? But it has this ability to be cunning and reappear at certain times. I think he had in mind when he developed that metaphor, and of course, this is pure speculation, was Robespierre, the cunning reason during that, the take from 1791 to 1794. But anyway, yeah, that's another use of the term in history. Métis is the Greek term, by the way, if people want to go back further in history. And there's a wonderful work by Martial Detian on métis, M-E-T-I-S, from which the French get the word métier, the profession. Yeah, métier, right? And yeah, this is a wonderful thing that's in Hesiod, an early Hesiod in Works and Days. The first Greek attempt to really look at everyday life after the phase of the age of the heroes, if you will, the age of the gods and heroes into everyday life. So Matisse was another one that could be, translated as craft as well as forward. So yeah, so it raises a lot of possibilities. If I could just read for a second, just 1 second. Yeah, on page 171, turning to the witch. This is Jack, of course, speaking. I mean, first of all, the persistence of craft before, through, and despite capitalism tells us that cunning craft as power, capacity, and social value is never eliminated or fully captured. This realm of a material mimesis preserves knowledge, transmits skills and wisdom, develops affinity circles, and extends craft into new spheres. Well, let's see. Yeah. Amidst capitalism's ruins, this recomposition sees a return of those techniques and knowledge that demonstrate an exemplarily collective continuity central to any anti-fascist composed body. This is, I think, very crucial phrase of his because, again, this is part of the prescriptive, I think. Yeah, for him, right? Micro anti-fascism poses a different type of renewal to the restoration of mythic violence and patriarchal sovereignty. These reversions and revisions multiply to repair and recompose. So turning to the witch needs to avoid romanticization of folkloric women while still tracing the ever-present resistance to microfascism's intersection of gender, war, and death. He goes back to his working triad there, and the autogenetic sovereign. In a similar vein, as histories of anti-fascism document actions and actors to create a continuity or reactivate archived collective memory, so this invocation of witchery and cunningcraft works to remember without romanticization, right? So some closing considerations. On the one hand, the return to the witches has a spiritual component, as witches were communicating with, quote, supernatural beings, occult forces with a marked talent for ending the patriarchal world. But even this is not some abstraction, as in the divine creator or head of an order. Jane Caputi, working on the history of myth in the age of Genocide, noticed that feminist myth-making is a worldview that imagines and passionately invokes the non-violent end of the world, the demise of patriarchal cosmogony, and an ongoing encounter with the powers, I'm sorry, the demise of the patriarchal cosmogony and an ongoing encounter with the powers of chaos, and updates this tradition, saying feminism is a politically spirituality precisely because it does not separate the body from the spirit, nor flesh from fantasies, nor skin from ideas. There's a mystical dimension to feminism as a multifaceted movement. It works from affects and passions. It opens that thorny field of desire, of relationship, of love, erotic swarms, of ritual and celebration, of longing beyond their sanctioned borders. I'll stop there, but I thought this is a very interesting, attempt by Jack to kind of set up some of the prescriptive principles going forward, you know, if you'd like, right? And this whole notion of body and spirit, right? Well, the old dichotomy, you know, in a way. I mean, you know, in some ways, you know, the old, I mean, this goes back a while, that when Nietzsche says the idea became feminine, in some ways, this is Plato at work, right? That separated basically reason and emotion, right? And this was the beginning of, if you will, in some ways, the war of the sexes. In some ways, yeah, yeah. You could go back and read it that way, to go back and read Plato in that vein. And you can see this, of course, too, in the symposium. You know, there's one woman and she's a fantasy in the Socrates' fantasy, and Diotima in the symposium, in the banquet, right? So,
Presumably based on a real woman, I would think would be safe to say, or women.
well, yes, of course, yeah, 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 yeah. But she's imaginary in the dialogue itself.
Right.
She's not an actual participant.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because that didn't happen in his circle, right?
Exactly. Yeah, Diotima's revenge. Benjamin had a nice piece on that, on Diotima's revenge, you know, with Socrates' wife. It's Antifa. Very nice. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, I don't know. Again, this notion of craft is very interesting. Is it craft as power? As Beryl points out, sometimes this notion of cunning can be as well, both craft and cunning can be very much misused, right? And can be taken up. And he's using craft in the strictly German sense too, I think. He's trying to use it as a much stronger than we just think of arts and craft or craft made, you know, this kind of thing in a much stronger way. And like, you know, like in the terms of science knowledge for the Germans, Wissenschaften is a very active process to know something. It's not just dissemination and reception, right? So, yeah. So the Craften, you know, et cetera. Yeah. The work of art is a Craften too. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, yeah.
I'm thinking about that one of those last lines, Michael and Beryl, that not required to be pure, heroic, or even good subjects, as sort of the response built into sort of Jack's elaboration here, that like right, if there are negative connotations attached to cunning, then fine. Right, like, you know, like if what's going on with cunning is that it means a maybe to some degree out of necessity secretive access to history and folkways and capacities that like are not going to necessarily be articulated positively, then like cool, that's our craft, you know, like more. So like it's right, exactly. It's a we're then getting into questions of ethics and morality and how that has to be sort of reformed, which of course is right. Like if we're thinking about the trivial and everyday life and just the way that our lives are framed and our values are framed, then yes, a transvaluation is going to have to be necessary in some way here, right? So the acceptance of cunning as a skill and a craft and a development of craft. It reminds me as well, I mentioned this at the very beginning, that Jack wrote extensively on secrecy earlier in his career, and part of the argument that he built around there is that the desire for transparency, number one, you know, is let me not spend any time on the way that this is used in liberal discourses, but focus on that secrecy is necessary sometimes, like the development of secrecy as a necessity. As a necessity in cunning, and now the development of cunning as a craft in some ways, not necessarily in full view of everybody, and that cunning is okay and like an acceptable part of simply the way we practice and think about. He doesn't use the word organizing and composition, that it becomes part of the way we think about how to properly compose ourselves, that we can go ahead and be cunning about this, and that's just like our everyday. And which is then maybe an interesting way to start thinking about how like myth making and storytelling, initiation, the building of squads, and stuff like that is potentially as we begin to rethink that like cunning is built into the building of all of this, because we're building micro anti-fascist compositions. And so like, it's the practices of cunning and the knowledge of cunning is going to have to be part of that composition if it's going to grow, right? I don't know. I find that really interesting. Beryl, what do you think? What do you make of that?
No, I think that's right on, David. Once you kind of acknowledge the way in which language constitutes that, then clearly your cunning has to be relatively secret. You don't come out as cunning. You actually use cunning behind the scenes in order to do what you've decided you need to do. I think that's an interesting point.
And it's it's a diminishment. Yeah, please, Christine.
I was just thinking another phrase that comes to mind, reference to cunning, that has a positive connotation is emotional intelligence. So women often are credited with having that, but it's also women are on the negative side, thought of as manipulative or having some, negative power over others that is hard to specify.
That's really good. I'm thinking of Silvia Federici's the chapter on the figure of the witch, and as she goes through the history of the named histories of the witch hunts and witchcraft that Jack has here. Federici's is the one I know the best, and her description of the ease with which women could be accused of having those kinds of special powers, and the pain, the disciplinary pain and publicity that would then be dropped on women simply because a farmer had a fallow field and blamed a cross look from a woman on his crops not growing that year, and things that ridiculous, that like the woman has a power that causes this negative thing, and therefore that. So like it's fascinating then to think of like the existence and the emergence of different forms of women's power, representational power, collective power and practice, and the backlash against those in that context, I think is. But
I think Michael is onto something in relation to the way in which it's very difficult now to unite people through symbols, because intergenerationally we have such different symbols. And I sent you, David, there was an article in The Guardian, which you may have seen already. There's research going on in Europe about the way that the far right operates through cultural production, and even things like, cooking programs on YouTube, which turn out to be done by sort of far right men. There's just so many, and I've learned through reading this, all sorts of little groups that I'd never heard of, and presumably they all connect in some way, but not in a universalist way. So the capacity to actually unite people through symbols has become, I think, much more difficult. I don't know where we go with that, but
No, I'm in agreement with you. You need a cultural reference system. I was not around in the 30s, but I love the 30s. I love the swing era. I study Cab Calloway, Fats Waller, all the jazz people of that period. I try to look at that. I read the fiction of it. I can reconstruct it in my head. What's been lost is that capacity of a generation, because everything is at the fingertip. You have to take into account this incessant digitalization, this incessant immediate access to quote unquote knowledge, which is not knowledge at all in the sense of Wissenschaften, right? Or Wissenkraften, if you want to talk about it that way. The making, in a sense. And I think this is very, very important to keep in mind. We're in a dilemma because of that, because some of the richest traditions out there are being, just erased from history. They're
being erased, or they're being misappropriated.
And misappropriated, exactly. Steve Bannon is very good at this. So certain people on the right, including Tucker Carlson, they're very good at taking certain texts and stuff. It's no accident to me that DeSantis is giving instructions that the Odyssey needs to be taught.
Yeah, of course.
They're not going to teach the Odyssey in terms of the Greek world and what it means for today, etc., how it's rewritten many times, including by Kazantzakis as well as Joyce and etc. You know, how time is condensed. It's not going to be taught that way. It's going to be taught as part of the myth of Western supremacist culture. Greek still becomes the cradle of democracy, you know, and this is one of the epic poems behind.
And military strength.
Yes, and the military strength. That's right. And please don't be tempted by too many women on your way home. Exactly. Don't stop at Cersei's Island, right?
Yes.
You know what I mean? You know. So anyway, all to say, I think this is really the major problem. You know, I mean, there are great terms here, new terms being made. I like this term, fabriculture, too, that he brings up, that he wrote about in a little essay called The Digital Touch. The paradigm, this is on page 170, excuse me, paradigm of cunning craft that is not solely tied to witchery is the trivialized sphere of crafting and craft culture, or what I have called fabriculture. Yeah. Which revitalized crafting, burst onto the cultural scene, and he went through there, and then he goes into marketplace commodification. All you have to do is turn on the TV. Everything is commodified around women now. You know, The View. Think about all these programs that you have, how the right comes back with the Bondis, the Kristi Noem, Caroline Levitts, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So to me, this is very, very important in many ways to keep in you know, how this becomes the anarchist knitting circle. Yeah, it's great. I mean, never heard of half of these places, but I like this anarchist. Maybe they can darn socks. That'll save me a lot of money if I can find someone who can darn socks. I'll pay for it. Every time I go to the tailor, the Russian tailor, $5, Michael, $5. I say, buy a new pair of socks. Go do it. $5, you know. So yeah, I'll pay two, you know, or two for $5. But anyway, so what can you say? Yeah, but anyway, yeah. So I think that, I mean, again, this notion of, I mean, this is something that's preoccupied me, obviously, and this whole thing of Stiegler taking care of generations, taking care of the youth. What does this really mean for our time today? Yeah. I mean, there's so much richness. I'm figuring if we had grown up with what we were doing, if you will, in the late 60s, 70s, and maybe even early in the 80s, if we had had the YouTube, the archival access at our fingertips, and the same kind of mentality, there would have been an outright, you know, revolution possible in some ways in terms of transmission, culture, etc. Yeah, you could have really marshaled this. Now it's relegated to very small communities, you know, these pockets of resistance. Yeah, yeah. I mean, yep, Hartung was you know, McCarthyism. It was a victim. McCarthyism, another speaking of the Cunning, you know, another Jewish artist who was the victim of you know, the anti-red, anti-communist you know, moment. People that grew up on the Lower East Side, people forget this. Yeah, and the creativity that was spawned out of that. So, yeah. I mean, look, I live in Fort Greene in Brooklyn. You know, some people know this, and Fort Greene is famous for two reasons, in my opinion, and probably more. But it's the place where the Revolutionary War, the American Revolutionary War, it was the battle for Long Island, and George Washington actually fought there. Right, so the mortars, the stone is still there from that period, and it's named Fort Greene because of Nathaniel Greene was the general who defeated the British. Right, there's a monument that's built because the British dumped almost 10,000 bodies in Wallabat Bay, right, and Sanford White, the architect, was commissioned to build a monument to these unknown soldiers who were thrown into Wallabat Bay to drown, right, on a ship, a sunken ship. So anyway, it's famous for that, the name itself, etc., Fort Greene and Fort Greene Park. The other thing is it has the Lafayette Avenue Presbyterian Church, which was a major underground railroad. Horace Greeley, who was operating in Brooklyn Heights, not so far away, but far away enough. But anyway, he would send over. He had no more room in terms of the Underground Railroad. He had to send them to Fort Greene to Lafayette Avenue Church. So they have this famous Underground Railroad there. The other thing it's very famous for is Frederick Douglass drafted the first version of the Emancipation Proclamation there with Todd Lincoln. Now, 90% of the residents in Fort Greene, I would say of those 90% of the residents, the average net assets for the people there, at least $750,000, right? Some own big brownstones, a brownstone there, 4-story brownstone, $10 million now, $8 to $10 million, have no idea of this history.
Yeah.
All they know is what's a good restaurant through their phones, right? All they know is that they've got a nice place, et cetera. How to get packages delivered at a certain time. Who delivers in the neighborhood in terms of takeout, et cetera, et cetera. This is the culture that we have now occupied in a sense. Even though Fort Greene was also a place that was politically very active during the 80s and the 90s. Charles Barron, who was a left member of the city council, very radical, used to have a lunch there. And there was but that Italian restaurant closed, of course, right? Bought out, closed, and is now an upscale Italian restaurant that costs an arm and a leg, right? Yeah. So anyway, I mean, again, I'm not trying to be nostalgic for this at all. I'm really speaking about the dilemma that we're really facing. It's a real hard sell in some ways, to do this. And you're right, David. I mean, to take a film like it's called Wicked, right? Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
To begin,
it was the you were doing a comic book and graphic novel class, right? The
I am
Wicked,
doing that.
the book Wicked was part of the sort of 80s and 90s postmodern reimagining of the heroes and villains in classic stories. The book, I haven't seen the movies or the play, but the book ends rather tragically, as you would expect. The play and the films that have been adapted from the book, I think, have sort of rosier endings. Although, again, I haven't experienced them yet. Although I am professionally
Is this a
required.
Marvel construction? It's not DC Comics, is it?
No, it's not comics. It's not comics. It's
No,
just
okay.
the novel is. I forget the name of the author, but the novel Wicked was just this author's retelling of the story from the perspective of the Wicked Witch, humanizing the Wicked Witch and making her sort of her story the center of the story.
Yeah.
That novel was wildly successful in the 90s, I think, 80s or 90s, and then all this came out of novel.
Okay.
A couple things I was thinking about, the experience of history. Number one, these kinds of short circuits and this impossibility of making history matter, and the disconnect is not just, as you said, Michael, like it's not at all a disconnect from the availability of facts or the capacity to attain facts. It appears to be like an affective lack, right? Like there's no experience of connection.
Very good point.
Stories. Yeah. There's no why would I give a shit? And there's no like, as Stiegler puts it, right, it's not part of a protension. It's not part of a future experience. It's not part of anything, which is terrifying to me, right? Like that really, really radical dislocation or disconnection from not just a particular history, which is bad enough, but the history itself and the idea that stories matter in beyond any kind of immediately utilitarian sense. Like stories are what you use to get an advantage on audiences or to get an advantage in your job or that kind of thing. Like stories aren't for connecting you to the past so that you know yourself in the present so that you can contribute to a future or whatever. It's that's stories or tools now. So I was thinking about that, about just the impossibility of feeling history as something that we're a part of and that matters. And then sort of connected to that, this notion of like right-wing lifestyle culture and how good the right wing has been at developing lifestyle culture that is simply taking place within a fascist context, but it's about like cooking and about like whatever relationship advice and whatever else.
You have it on the left too. Yeah, cappuccino Marxists, and now today it's Negroni leftists, right? So this is a problem to me. Not that I'm moralistic about this stuff. Yeah, of course, but at the same time, yeah, this is what it becomes. It becomes lifestyle more than the real thinking and praxis that is required. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and potentially an opportunity as well from a media strategist part of my brain, that like there is maybe an opportunity to do like quality left content production that has to do with things that people relate to, that has actually to do with everyday life, but is very much in the context of left values and left ethics and left pretensions and left relationships to stories and like within a left structure, which I happen, again, as a media strategist, to think there's an enormous audience for out there that is fully untapped, because there is very little really thoughtfully left cultural production that is simply about life, but presented within the context of a leftist framework. So yeah, these are the thoughts that are
always begin the story when the boss brings in the worker and he says, "I hear you're a communist. You're fired." And he says, "A communist? No, they're much too conservative for me."
That's a Stanley story right there, right? That's
indeed. That's one of many. Yes.
Yeah. That's one of my favorites. It's a really good one. I've retold that one many times.
Much too conservative for me. Yeah.
And the last thought I had, Michael, at one point you mentioned just within everything else, sort of I was thinking about the targeting of women as like by consumer culture, and teaching the history of advertising from time to time, remembering that like as a demographic audience, it was middle-class women who were seen by advertisers who had the domestic purse, who had control over domestic spending, that were the first consumer culture target audience. I tell my students that at the beginning of like print advertising, it was mostly like slaves and land that were being sold. But as consumer culture developed, it was very quickly middle-class women who were seen as having a disposable income at their command, that were the target audience for everything that we would then associate with the consumer sort of restructuring of lifestyle and the consumer short-circuiting of history, of memory, in these particular ways, which then I just again makes I think more and more support for Jack's argument that feminism and fascism's orientation toward the elimination of capacity around gender is really fundamental, both to understanding how it functions and understanding any kind of a strategy or tactic for opposing it. I'm thinking specifically now about the minefield of my family holiday dinners. And the way that I made the incredible mistake of bringing up my nieces and nephews are all like college age or a little older now. So I was chatting with them, and their sensibilities are a little different than my siblings and the other folks. So I was chatting with them about Christmas, and I was talking to them about the origins of Christmas. And we're talking about Coca-Cola and a Coca-Cola campaign as the origins of Christmas as we know it. And I went through like the whole thing of the color scheme and the red and white, and it's because it's the colors of Coke, and Coke invented the Santa's outfit and all of that. So like this is like whatever. So I go through all of that in the presence of my siblings and my in-laws and a couple aunts and uncles, and then got like a real talking to at the dinner table by everybody. And I say very seriously, by like, these are all people I love very much and whose, orientations of the world I'm also very familiar with, so are not surprising me. But I then got like a really heartfelt, like almost tears in her eyes, like also disciplinary plea from my sister-in-law that when her kids started having kids, I needed to promise that I would not tell them Santa Claus was not real. I swear. And this is like, again, this is my sister-in-law. I've known her since I was 10. She's a real full human being in all of the ways. And like, this is so core, this trick, this like years of like telling kids stories that aren't true while they actually know it and get very excited about being in that moment and all that kind of stuff, like so core to the being. And it just strikes me that like, in some ways, like the problem is contained in this sort of moment of everyday life, where like the machine, the kind of micro-fascist war machine that has been assembled over the last century or so, that has programmed these flights to abstractions and these real deep relationships to abstractions that short circuit concrete relationships to human beings. And therefore short circuit the idea of why the past is important, why the present is important, and why the future is important. There was no explaining like a cognition kind of argument, a child development kind of argument.
Taking the fun out of Christmas.
Exactly, and the childhood out of it, the joy out of it, the meaning out of it. Like my sister-in-law was really feeling like something might be lost, like I was a threat to the experience that she had not had with her grandkids yet, and was like really worried that I would be. And it just strikes me that, like, again, like what kind of micro anti-fascist work am I going to do there? You know, like,
well,
like
let me tell you,
putting my mouth is the only thing I could do right there. Like, you know, truly, like nothing's going to be listened to. Like how, like there's no way to. Anyway, it's a fascinating problem. This like
next year you should show the French film, the French anti-war film, anti-fascist film, Who Killed Santa Claus? It's a 1941 resistance film by Christian Jacquet. Of course, the Nazis killed Santa Claus. It's very well done. Who killed Santa Claus? You know, this person that was in the village playing Santa Claus. It's a great film, by the way. Yeah, a great film of resistance during this period, 1941. Of course, you know, the beginning of Vichy in an organized way. So yeah, so you'll really shock your sister then. You know, who killed him? But anyway.
They would say I did, for sure.
Yes, of course. There you go. That's all right. It's okay. Yeah.
So yeah, the question of that sort of long-term audience targeting, like really the concrete question of the building of this sort of audience apparatus, this consumer apparatus, and our relationships to history and our relationships to stories and our relationships to myths. You know, I'm trying to, in that moment, I'm trying to build a sort of alternative narrative of Christmas that's still interesting with my nieces and nephews. Oh, cool. Yeah, we can talk about this at Christmas as well as like whatever. And no, that has to be, you know, that has to be shut down so the machine can reproduce itself and whatever. Find it fascinating. The relationship to education too. These are just a few of the notes that I was taking as the discussion continues. The you know, the idea that in the sort of post GI Bill moment, the post 50s, post 60s moment, that feminism and anti-racism start making their way into academia, and so access to schooling is limited progressively, right? And so we find ourselves in a situation where if you want to learn the Odyssey as part of your regular curriculum, you're going to have to go to a private school run by Ron DeSantis, because we can't have nice things like education if we're going to ruin it with feminism and anti-racism and stuff like that, which has become a really explicit statement as this has matured in the sort of MAGA psyche, that it's just being said out loud. Education needs to go in this form because it's filled with DEI. And so we've got to essentially scrap it all and start over from the ground up, which is how I kind of read the DeSantis project. Yeah.
Well,
and the place of religion.
I have something else in mind. I think they see the divergence away from the classics, if you will, of which most of us in this room have been, you know, subjected to early on in our educational backgrounds. I think that the right sees this turn away to just reading contemporary works, right, on racism, feminist things. They see this as the problem. This is what they see, right? In some ways. The question really, to me at least, is when Alexander Koshev tells the leading radicals of May of 68, when they ask him, how can we become more radical? He says, learn ancient Greek. It's a very subversive statement in some ways because, the real task for educators today is not to make political statements, not to become ideologues anymore, because that's backfired, obviously.
Totally.
The question is to be, if you want to talk about craft and craftsmanship at this point, um, uh, is to learn how to subvert. When you read the Odyssey, talk about the role of Penelope, the role of Athena in the background as a stage director. Begin to think about these things in the context of the play and be able to frame it differently. That's really the issue to me. I mean, it's not whether you read the Odyssey or Toni Morrison in the class. You know what I mean? It's really the question of how it's treated, the material, and what actually is done with it. Jack's work here, and he's in a tradition, at least in my mind, of doing micro history. And Carlo Ginzburg is one of the greats on this. I don't know if you know Carlo Grinza, the worm and the cheese.
Cheese and the worms?
Yeah. Magnificent micro historian. And in a way, he's going into that world, even though, Ginsburg's a little more specific, just in the agricultural, sector in Italy. But he does other things too, besides the worm and the cheese. That to me is his masterpiece. But anyway, he's really got it. But I think the task again, and this is why I keep emphasizing, you need some kind of symbolic representation going on too. So for me, the task is, again, how do you build, right? Symbols again that have some meaning to this generation who is lost. I mean, they're really lost. I mean, there is no soul. They're nice, they're kind, et cetera, but really lost culturally, intellectually, in many ways. Even the curiosity is hardly there, unless it's curiosity about things of gossip or that kind of thing. There's very little of the curiosity. I'm not saying it's everybody. I'm not trying to make a blanket statement, but it's a good 85, 90%, in a sense. So how do you build again? How does symbol making come back into process? How does building referential systems come back into process? That, a student, if they're faced with Ezra Pound, at least has a background to understand what this means, right? At least has the wherewithal to go to do something there instead of just reading spoken word poetry. You see where I'm going. I mean, I'm trying to really say this is very important. And again, as Stiegler says, and he's not the first to say it, I know I've mentioned this many times, Marcuse, said the program of American education is the systematic moronization of its people. And this makes advertising possible. This was Sweezy, and you probably read Sweezy's thesis on advertising. This is all coming out, 50s and 60s, as you know very, very well in your own research, David. So, when Stiegler speaks of systemic stupidity, right, it's not new. It's just reached the point. It's so systemic. It's, in a way, and how do you get out of it, right, in many ways. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So again, yeah. So I was surprised. I mean, a very nice photograph of my friend in the New York Times. She's sitting in a chair, very elegant, and she's a classicist by training. April, I haven't seen her in years, et cetera. We were not really in touch, but it was nice to see her. I think I'll send her an email. But anyway, yeah. I mean, she said that she can teach the Odyssey, but again, this is being laid upon them by the state. Yeah. And once the state has its hand in education to that degree, remember the great classicist in the United States was fired from Brooklyn College. Moses Finkelstein was his name. He became Sir Moses Finley in Britain. Yeah, he wrote a book on the ancient Greeks, the world of Odysseus, a major classicist in his way. Yeah, one of the great British Marxist historians. They were very good. It was of a group, Finley, George Thompson, many others that were able to really do incredibly good work. Yeah. But yeah, so again, for me, this is very important. So I think Jack is hinting at that, in some ways. I guess the question again is if you go to the end, if you want to, I mean, I don't know if you want to go to the last section. It's up to you, David. I mean, in a way.
Sure. No, there's I've got my eye on some things about deplatforming and the last
Yeah, why
section.
don't you go there? Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Okay, but whatever you're saying about the
No,
last
no, it's
section,
all right.
keep that in mind. So what we'll do then, the two moments that I just want to talk about, deplatforming on 146 and 147, because I think it sets up actually a lot of the conversation we've been having. And then in the last section, starting on 173, he talks about the limitations of abolition. So on the one hand, we've got the limitations of deplatforming. I'll just read those three paragraphs. And then at the last two sections, he talks about the limitations of abolition. And this is both with an eye towards continuing this discussion, right, of what an micro anti-fascism would look like, and what we're thinking about when we're thinking about how to compose this ourselves. So I just want to I'll keep it short. So I'll start right at the bottom of 146. Movement-based anti-fascist responses have mostly been grounded in confrontational and intolerant tactics, and for good reason. Perhaps the most well-known signature anti-fascist tactic is known as deplatforming. Deplatforming prevents the composition of a fascist body by disrupting its ability to recruit, build a base, and gather momentum. Deplatforming commits to removing the technical and media conditions for fascist speech, thought, and performance. It prioritizes survival and community defense over uncritical commitments to abstractions like free speech. Anti-fascism is determined to deny the legitimate standing of fascist opinions, since we may not always be able to change someone's beliefs, but we sure as hell can make it politically, socially, economically, and sometimes physically costly to articulate them. The goal here is to push beliefs away from public sites to get those perspectives to move into private and secret shadows. I think two more paragraphs. Recently, social media platforms, especially YouTube, have been targeted as misinformation spreaders and channels for fascist recruitment. Algorithmic reworking and account banning have done their own version of deplatforming fascist composition from major social media sites. This again is during and after the first Trump administration. So how quickly things have changed here. But those right-wing forces have created and occupied minor networks for a micro-platformed regrouping. That regrouping has been successful, right? And they're back on the major platforms. So like regrouping was a go. Receding from popular media channels might curtail some info spread, but we've already witnessed how inspiration to mass violence no longer needs mainstream channels. In an era defined by mass fascism, perhaps such deplatforming sites of amassing could be strategically central. But in the age of what we'll examine as groupuscular action and networked squadrismo, such mass action might never appear. So and then he gets into the importance of gender right after this. So deplatforming has historically involved praxis against public demonstrations of white supremacy, whether in the long history of Klan marches, neo-Nazi demonstrations, or fascist skinhead punk concerts. Anti-fascism tends to favor street organizing as its topography of deplatforming. But for whom are streets an easily accessed and preferred site of confrontation? Town squares and music clubs are not the primary places for microfascism. This book's centering of gender and microfascism now needs to be applied to micro-anti-fascism. And it's those subsequent sections that I think we've been talking about quite a bit already today. So that was I just wanted to make sure we drew attention to the importance both of deplatforming as one of two primary strategies within anti-fascism that Jack talks here as both justified, rational, understandable, and also limited as we think about microfascism and anti-microfascism. And that second key concept is abolition. And he gets into abolition on 173, which is the second to last section. So Michael, if you want to hop in with whatever we're going to go to towards the end here, we could just pick up there. That'll be great. Unless anybody wants to say anything about deplatforming, we can just continue. Yeah, Michael, go for it.
Well, just to go to deplatforming, I tried to access today because I heard Mandani's response to Caroline Levitt was excellent, but I can't find it. So obviously there's some tampering that's going on. I don't know, David, if you could find it. I mean, I'm not adept at this, finding the deplatforming, or, I'm not good at the dark web, as they say, in some ways, to get a hold of this. But Mandani supposedly did a very good video of responding to Caroline Levitt's attacks upon him. He takes the mayoral he goes to Gracie Mansion on Thursday this week coming up. This is the beginning, right? So yeah. So I don't know. I mean, is this something that is a common practice now? Because this is being censored right away by this is a capacity that the right, even though when Jack writes this, that's the first Trump administration. Now the second Trump administration is good at this too, leaving this out so people can't see it, even though it's gone around. I mean, I know of it because of the circles I keep, getting emails, Facebook, but no link to the actual Mandami, response. Yeah.
Fascinating. It's certainly possible. Left-wing or left-ish podcasters and content creators have for a very long time complained of problems with the algorithm.
Okay.
And this is exactly what the right wing was complaining about after the first Trump administration, that you can just tweak the algorithm a little bit and certainly suppress.
So instead of the Goebbels' famous saying, "Who controls the street controls the state," now who controls the algorithm controls the state.
Controls the state.
Yeah.
Which is very much part of Jack's point going into the TikTokers in here, and right, this is now central. Like whatever we make of it, this is a terrain of struggle for sure.
Right.
Which, and Michael, I think you've mentioned is not unimportant when we think about Larry Ellison and Oracle, both of which come from the CIA, being central in the sale of TikTok and being central in what looks like their eventual acquisition of CNN. That this is, right. Like the state is very much trying to get control of the algorithm. In the TikTok sale, the algorithm, it's more complicated than that. Oracle's not going to have full control over it. But that's certainly an element of what's going on here, right? Is the algorithm has become a terrain of struggle,
sure.
and the state is acting to try to get it under control.
People forget too that this is again why history is important. Gates, Ellison, many of the other tech giants, including Bezos in some ways, went through a very lean period. After the dot-com bust, many of these stocks were completely flat over the up until quantitative easing took place in 2009. So in some ways, Obama, the administration, and the Democratic Party was very essential in really rebuilding Gates, Ellison, and this whole culture. The price of Microsoft stock in 2003 was $20. It's well over 300 now, right? Yeah. To give you an idea. And it had gone down from in the hundreds to 20 because of the dot-com bust. And also there was not much faith by Wall Street in their ability to really make the big comeback. The same thing with Oracle. So you have to kind of think about this, what politics was going on at that time too, to make this happen. The same thing about Alex Karp with Palantir. Palantir is a pipe dream right now, but because he's connected to the Pentagon so much, this has been one of the most successful stocks of the year. It's astronomically priced, right? In terms of what, Wall Street, one measurement you use is called the price to earnings ratio. And it's a multiple that's used in terms of what's called fundamental analysis. But, again, they have really nothing in terms of, sharp management, but they have government contracts. It's all because they're friendly with the administration. And this is people nobody's really looking at this carefully enough. And you're right, when you bring up Ellison, this is dangerous. This is very dangerous, what's happening.
And I mean, it's you really get a sense for how tight the state is, right? And
Yes.
the separation of government and private makes no sense. Larry Ellison, during those lean years, was a programmer at the CIA.
Yes.
And the Total Information Awareness Program is what Oracle was formed from. They chunked
Yes.
themselves off of the CIA.
That's correct.
So yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is very much Leon Panetta is part of all of the major meetings about the new center in Nashville that Oracle's building. I mean, it's very much a state operation. Yep.
I mean, I got a report, through a friend on fuel cell technology. It's a company too, that how important it's going to be for data centers. This new building of data centers, because fuel cell technology is cheaper than using just, quote, fossil fuels. So some of this can be, passed off to fuel cell technology. Whether or not this is a bust or a pipe dream, I'm not in the business to say so, et cetera. But it goes to show you how much emphasis, again, is put on this, and again, I mean, this is a different level that we always have to think objectively where we are, how that's unfolding. Yeah, in so many ways. Yeah. So yeah, it's scary. Barry Lewis is a scary person. Yeah, the woman is now an head of CNN, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the program.
Very wise.
Weiss, I'm sorry.
Very Weiss.
Yeah.
CBS.
Yeah. I was trying to Christianize her. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Barry Weiss has CBS now. Not CNN, CBS.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, the Paley family's turning over in their grave. Yeah, at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, and she didn't she immediately kill a 60 Minutes story that the wasn't that just in the last week or two? The administration.
Yeah, but it played in Canada. I didn't see it.
Did,
See it, Leslie? Did you see it? It went to Canada. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, they got it out.
So what are we? Oh, deplatforming is where we were. Yeah, so deplatforming. So right, so the state mechanisms in deplatforming. You're right. Really, really interesting.
Yeah, there was a
Jacob,
couple of months ago, there was a Jubilee 20 conservatives versus Mehdi Hassan. And one guy said, who was debating Mehdi, that I'm a fascist. And he was like, what? Why are you saying this in this talk? He was just completely dumbfounded. But I thought the fascist was winning the argument. I thought Mehdi Hassan, who's a journalist who I think was on MSNBC, I thought he was trying to make a rules-based argument, but I don't think that works with fascists. I don't really think you should debate fascists, but if you're going to, I think you have to say, okay, if you're a fascist, you should not be debating me. You should be trying to attack me right now and trying to cause me harm. This is the logic of your thinking. Like to call him a coward. But yeah, that could be very dangerous.
Mandani thing. I'm really glad you brought this up, because one thing Mandani is really good at, he is incredibly media savvy. And, in some ways, what he supposedly did, I have not seen it, but he reversed exactly what Levitt said without being ad hominem or ad feminine towards Caroline Levitt or Trump at all, and he did so with grace, without any kind of, thing. So again, something to be taken into account, in some ways. How do you deal with these people? I agree with Jacob. There's no point in going on Fox News. I mean, I told Rick Wolf, what do you do this for? It's exposure, Michael. I said, exposure for whom? I mean, none of your people are going to watch Fox News. And who did you reach? All they're there to do is slaughter you. So, and that's what they do. Yeah, that's it. They don't get a word in edgewise. There's no continuity of Rick being able to speak, Yeah. I mean, Stanley used to be pleased because the business channel, what is it, MSNBC, the business MSNBC, something like that. Yeah. They called them up the labor thing back in the day. I think it was the automobile, the UAW strike. many years ago, about 20 years ago. He was so proud. I'm going on the business channel. I said, what are you going to tell the business people? You talk about class compromise in a way. No, it's all right. They never invited him back. I said, are you surprised? Anyway, so, but anyway, I'm sorry, but it's
Yeah,
good.
I'm searching right now. I'm trying to find the link for the Mamdani thing while we're talking. But yeah, I've seen a couple friends of the show, a couple friends of the Institute. Rick Wolf does it whenever he can. He gets on with the Judge. He gets on with Lou Dobbs. I saw Cornel West last week on Abby Phillips' show on CNN. It's got the panel show, and she's
Unbelievable, man. Yeah, they waste their time, in my opinion. Yeah. Like they're going to convert some, like they're preachers, You have been a sinner all these years, Yeah, etc. Yeah.
I mean, and that is like at least one of the questions, right? Like, is it worthwhile thinking about audiences here at all, or do we need to completely change the way we conceive of movement building? Like, is this about and Michael, this is, I guess, sort of to your question about symbols and representation and what form, what we mean by that, and what form that could take, if not like a specific. We're not looking for a logo. That's a different brainstorm. But yeah, what does anti-fascist or anti-microfascist representation look like, and for whom, or like how is that stuff created? The vast majority of like our common sense, the hegemony of how we put together, how we produce culture, is that we assume, or we imagine an audience that we're trying to move in some way or another. Hit the like or subscribe button, contribute to the movement, show up at a protest, like whatever. But it's always a strategic performance where there's a strategist and an audience that's being moved. And so how do we imagine, how do we think about, I'm not even sure what the words are. The words that I want to use are things like, how do we message for this movement, or how do we, you know what I mean? Like, but that's exactly the kind of stuff that I think we need to move away from, or past, or something. And so how do we think about something like representation, movement representation, that isn't kind of a strategically engineered culture where strategists get together and say, you know what this audience likes? They like it when people argue. You know what this audience doesn't like? They don't care when people argue. You know what they want to see? Puppies and babies. You know what they don't want to see is angry voices. They like smiles. They don't like shouts. Like, how do we think about representing without going through that mode of representation? I don't know. I'm just what I struggle with.
Anti-microfascist influences is what we need.
Right. And what is that? How
what
can
does that mean?
Yeah,
what does that look like? What is that thing?
Yeah.
I feel like we don't have it yet.
Well,
or maybe it's
that kind of
problematizes
it. Yeah, he problematizes it vis-a-vis a take from Foucault's The Birth of Biopolitics on the second to last page. I mean, it begins this is page 175. Micro-anti-fascist abolition defends the preservation of life in hostility to the preservation of lethal abstraction characterizing and patriarchal reality ordering. This anti-fascism, this is crucial, fashions a collective subject who sorts out what to abolish, right, and what to preserve. A bifurcation departing from the micro-political sovereign who determines what is to die and what is to live. This is a play on Foucault. This is in the History of Sexuality, number one, the first volume of the History of Sexuality, the last chapter of that. the sovereign defines who is to live and who is to die, and how that's now become in the realm of the state, right? This is really, in some ways, the birth of biopolitics here, yeah, in many ways, in the late 70s. And so two abolitionist projects then that hasten the dismantling of autogenetic sovereignty-based institutions versus those that defend them. Abolition that is life-affirming, even in their calls, Black Lives Matter, we love ourselves alive, versus abolition that generates fear-based nihilism, suicidal elements, and necrophilic wars. One makes life worlds, and the other generates life-destroying realities. These abolitions are competing with antagonistic restorations. While microfascists dream of a restorationist violence in the war on women, the micro-anti-fascist reversion invokes restorative justice. Reparations and recuperations destitute autogenetic sovereignty's violences. Micro-anti-fascism is never finished. It is an ongoing process of rooting out poisons, not in the name of purity, but as preservation of openness to mutability and experimentation. I'd just like to make one marginal comment on all of this, vis-a-vis the notion of reparations. We have been involved now for close to, it's going on almost 27, 28 months of a genocide in Palestine, right? There's not been one talk of restorative justice nor reparations. The left has not put out one program or one proposal about reparation. Who is to rebuild? The latest gossip is that Somalia will be the new place of location for the Palestinian people. So this is very much a question, a very material question of what is going on. These issues have been totally forgotten in some ways, because again, of where more morality in politics get in the way of actual practical politics, right? In a sense. And, sometimes it's good to bring Machiavelli back to the scene, right? In order to see, how can you really affect this, right? And this would be the stuff. I love Francesca Albanese. I really respect her. She's put a lot of her neck out there, etc. But it's time to start thinking about who is to restore these people's lives, right? Who is to restore the reparations and the what they've been? No, this is an outright. I mean, it's a genocide of a people, and we talk about it, but in a sense, the solutions are not being proposed, etc. It's just a reaction towards. And this is, again, the problem of protest versus that of revolution, if you will. Yeah, or gradual reformism. We'll get it through the international courts. Give me a break. Yeah. Yeah. So, David, I saw you unmuted yourself. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I just muted to cough and then unmuted. It had nothing to do with that.
So the bifurcation is very important that he's coming out of this now. Yeah, please. Yeah. Bifurcation comes back, is now a concept that it's, the splitting again and bifurcating realities is a kind of important thing. Again, to me, this is a displacement, at least philosophically, from the Hegelian Marxist antagonistic dialectic where we should be, and where Adorno always said, my work is antithetical. That's where it is. He's situated from the position of the antithesis to anything that is, quote, life-denying, etc., right? In a sense. So this, to me, is what the tradition really offers, something like this, even in a deeper way, to my mind, again. Yeah. We're not in a protagonist-antagonistic dialectic anymore. We're not in the for itself, in itself only. We are really in the antagonistic dialectic, if we're really thinking, to my mind. And the same thing when Adorno places himself outside, right, into the antithetical, that the work is antithetical completely. Yeah. So I don't know. These are just some thoughts of mine, where I would try to take this in a different, in a direction that might, get us out of here. So just to go back to the bifurcation, over time, this is the last paragraph, thanks to immense composition in the margins and the trivial, another interregnum passage forms. It bifurcates through other autos, Genesis, relations to past and making of futures. All that is life affirming can wage war against the death machines that could lay waste to reality as they find their final act of sovereign shaping. Together, this multitude, also archaic and contemporary, makes a world rooted in vigilance against the return of microfascism, an embodied sensibility that could be worthy of the term micro-anti-fascism. So he kind of ends with this in a sense, right? Anyway, I thought this was very, very good ending, for what he's doing. But again, I think we should be very well aware that the antithetical, living in the antithetical, living through an antagonistic dialectic is a very important position to have right now. Again, going back to Stiegler in some ways, the negentropic, right, that Stiegler, is speaking about to get us out of the anthropocentric Anthropocene, right, or the capital scene is another thing, because we're always running the risk. And this is one thing I really admire about Adorno, despite his lack of action. Everybody criticizes poor Teddy for not, anyway, but he never would sell out thought. Yeah, he would never sell out that antithetical stance in so many ways, right? Never compromise thought, right? In some ways. And I'm not saying that that is something that translates directly into political action, but in some ways, the writing of Adorno is a political act. You have to look again at the writing also as a political act. I'm not trying to turn this into a plea or defense of Adorno, but the writing itself is, again, a kind of very important moment, if you will, of the anti-fascist or anti-micro-fascist, tendency, right? And where we can go with that in some ways. Because it's not going to happen, at least in my opinion, with all due respect to movement politics. Black Lives Matter, where is it? Where's Occupy Wall Street? Right? Really think about this, with realists, take off the glasses, don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain, right? And strip away all this in a sense. What has the movement politics really led to? We have not had an anti-war movement, for 20 something years. And that anti-war movement in New York City, which I marched in, against the Iraq War, the second Iraq War, was completely staged. I mean, it was just barricades all up and down from Washington Square Park to 34th Street to the recruiting stations. Yeah, it wasn't really a march or protest. It was a massive amount of people. But what did it lead to? Since then we had another 18 years of devastation of Afghanistan. You can go through this. I don't need to do this, of where it is. So the question to me is, again, we have to think beyond this. And I really like this notion, but it's something that we need to develop and talk about as maybe alternative sites of resistance, and maybe something that could catch hold, this notion of the craft, right? The witchcraft, if you want, other things that he's talking about here. How do you build that? Can that be built through study groups? Can that be built in the classrooms? Are these the possibilities going forward? Because, yeah. I mean, you go to these marches. I mean, I go to MoMA of films. The average age of the person there is 78 years old. I'm still young, supposedly. Right? I mean, I see these old, but they're still sharp in their mind and great. They're enjoying it, but they're the only ones that are going to Pasolini or to hear Buñuel, etc. The kids go if they hear it's cool, in a sense, right? Yeah.
So is it possible that these things are going on and we just don't know about it? Are there cunning craft study groups? I think so.
I'll look in every alleyway, but anyway, I'm not.
You're just not invited.
I'm not looking in the right places. Maybe.
That's right. You're not invited.
expand my horizons a little
Or you
more.
need to start one. Maybe
Okay,
this.
yeah, all right. Right, okay.
Well, and it's interesting to think about how surveilled people, say, under the age of 18 are, and
Mm.
whether it's possible
Right.
for young people to do anything without it being known. And if
Yeah.
like if we do not yet know about the emerging sort of young leftist moments, it would be very hard to believe that the state doesn't know about them.
Well, you bring up what both you and Leslie bring up, which you mentioned earlier about Jack's earlier work, secretive societies,
Yeah.
secret societies. You know, Lenin and Trotsky did not announce at Café Central
No.
they're going to take Russia. This was a secret society, the League of Communists. It was a secret conspiracies. These were not childish games. Let's go out on a demonstration, in a sense. So the moment of secrecy very important. Yeah, yeah, in all of this, right? Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. And I like a generation that doesn't have any like apparatus to learn how to organize off of the digital terrain is going to have a really hard time being secret in any meaningful way, right? I mean, this is a big part of the problem, which is also like to touch on that. If part of anti-microfascism is not focused on the exchange of ideas, platforming and deplatforming ideas, but of ways of life, ways of living, ways of being in the world, where, for heaven's sake, are the structures within which youth can learn anti-fascist ways of living? They're difficult the world has become so subsumed by surveillance technology. The world that they're growing up in has become so subsumed by surveillance technology, which not only now surveils but anticipates the intellectual and cognitive needs they'll have through AI and tries to produce them just at the moment that a need arises, so that youth now doesn't have to learn how to satisfy their own cognitive needs. Like the one big question, I think the overarching question, right, Michael, is there's no conversation about reparations. There's no general strike because Roe v. Wade was struck down 2 years ago, and there's something like 11 states in the country that women could go to jail for having an abortion in. It's not there. So like
and also think of the UAW. Sorry to interrupt, but just
go for it.
how absurd this is. The UAW, Sean Fine, announces we're going to strike in 2028. What kind of nonsense is this? You're telling the bosses, get ready. Give us 3 years. We're giving you 3 years advance notice. Can you imagine that this is the nonsense that we're going through? There's going to be a general strike, 3 years down the road, you're telling the bosses?
Randy Weingarten wants us to do this as well. We are defying Randy Weingarten's diktat by continuing with our contract negotiations in 2026, rather than pushing them to 2028 when we can all strike together. Is what?
Unbelievable how stupid this is.
It's asinine, and it's
totally asinine. Yeah.
It is. What they want is a very nice, orderly labor action in 2028. That's
complete
really
class
campaign.
collaborators in the word sense. Yeah.
Well, it's for the Democratic. I mean, it's the campaign, right? It's
2028 is the next presidential election. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And this is, as I tell my friends around AFT,
in advance, right?
as I tell my friends around AFT all the time, when AFT organizers are doing sign-up sheets for strikes and stuff like that, that's the contact list for the Democratic Party when the next campaign comes around.
Right.
And it is, I mean, directly the contact list for the Democratic Party the next time the campaign comes around. Like this is what we're doing here. My big worry, we've only got like 10 minutes left, I guess. What I think about the relationship to movements and all of that, I worry, and this would be something that happens behind Jack's back. This isn't like the intention of the argument, but I worry that this I worry that this devolves into a Voltairean tending your own garden. Like you want to tend your own anti-fascist garden, but We can't think about how to connect to a movement. We can't think about how to organize. It has to be compositional. And I fear always with these kinds of analyses, though I love them very much, that composition ends up standing in for what we don't want to talk about, which is bullshit asshole organizing, where somebody has to get on the phone and make people feel like they have to show up somewhere, and that group of people has to make other people feel like they have to do something, or else nothing ever coalesces. And so what I worry is that we've got a strategy document without a strategy, without a movement, without wanting to be a strategy document. And what it begins to give us a roadmap for is how to feel like beautiful souls who are doing micro anti-fascist work in our everyday lives, but are lost and isolated, even though we don't want to be black holes. There's there's no map, and Jack can't provide it. I don't mean to make this a fault in his argument, for how to not be micro anti-fascist black holes, and end up walking the world wanting really badly to be good anti-micro-fascists, but as part of that, not having an organizational strategy in mind, and therefore not being able to protend ourselves. This, it's if we're compositional, if we're hoping that things happen around us and we end up being part of something, then we're going to be little anti-fascist black holes bouncing around, bouncing off of all of these micro-fascist moments without ever connecting to any other micro anti-fascists. Which is why this is a great book for all of the reasons. And my fear is that, in fact, much like Adorno, this is one more message in a bottle that's got a lot of really important stuff to think about, but we are no less effed as a result. We are no closer to reparations. We are no closer to. We're not even closer to the end of the genocide.
Talking about reparations, much less close to them.
Exactly.
That's talking about, right? In the sense, right? Yeah. I mean, it's as if Johannesburg never took place, as if Nelson Mandela never was on the political scene, much less, what went on. And this, again, being able to connect this, that Haiti is still paying the French government, right, for daring to rebel in 1791. This is complete insanity, and under any formal or transcendental logic, right, and dialectically, totally insane what's going down. But at the same time, it's allowed, it keeps going on, et cetera, et cetera. And you have to ask the question again, why, are we relegated to pockets of resistance at this point? Are we relegated to a dialectics of defeat in which, because the dialectics of defeat means you no longer have, people forget, they talk about singularity today, but singularity is also in a dialectical relationship with particularity and universality. This is the triad in Hegel that always needs to be thinking. And when you say you need a social movement, that's part of the universal. It's not just the singular craft, or that you've got this great, indigenous culture that's working, which I'm all for. I just found a great book. I showed it to Leslie last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago, on the indigenous comics, right? By this guy from Vancouver. It's really good. It's great. But in a sense, yes, that's to reach an audience. It's great for the storytelling, et cetera. But does it become a universal movement in some ways? Yeah. And again, the question, if you go back in history, at least, generationally speaking, to say the late 50s and the early 60s, the rebellion was really against being atomistically constituted, being a number in the system. This was really the whole point of the Port Huron statement, right? The university, you read Clark Kerr's The Idea of the University, this move towards the technological university. Where did that rebellion came from? This helped spawn part of the New Left. This started to help form this, that was able to meet up with, quote, Black freedom movements, civil rights movements, all these kind of things were connected and interconnected. The problem today, again, is what's been happening. It's so compartmentalized, right? It's a great thing that this is happening. Black Lives Matter, but Black Lives Matter never studied capital, right? They didn't come to capital reading groups. Very few people, when you begin to think about this, you had, on the other side, other groups that become compartment. We don't want to talk to them, etc.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think this is, again, part of the problem, which is exactly what capitalism wants. And it's basically positivistic thinking that's winning all the time. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
I think this was a great contribution. But again, I would say, one has to think this through, as you were saying too, David, is how does this move into a collective movement? How does this really where's the fire, that's going to really burn right here? It has a pyrotechnic aspect to it, but it needs a flame that's going to last, that will, go throughout. It's like that great quote. I always love this scene with Marlon Brando at the end of the film Burn. If you kill him, this is Toussaint, in the figure of Jose Dolores. If you kill him, he can become a myth. But even more, he becomes a martyr. And do you want the story of this person? It will go like fire, throughout the Caribbean. Do you want this spreading to all these moments? And in a sense, you don't have the Castro on the scene. You don't have, at least the rise of, certain African, liberation movements, etc. Even though there's talk about this, and there's this tremendous emphasis again on the global South, right? And in a way, is that going to be different, right? Yeah. So, that makes.
Yeah, I was thinking about the difference between now and the anti-colonial moment, and how important it was for the movements of the 60s, to have that reference around the world, and how dangerous it was for the state, knowing that movements here had that reference around the world, that the anti-colonial struggles had echoes here in the Black liberation and feminist movements, and back and forth. And there's no global struggle to connect to. So I guess we have to create it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Most students don't even know where Ghana is.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
I mean, it's a problem too. Geography, geopolitics also means you learn the geography, the landmass, the natural resources, etc. Yeah.
Vietnam in Australia has become a place for cheap holidays.
I
That's
hear
what
you.
young people
I hear you.
know about it.
Yeah.
Nothing about the liberation movement. Nothing.
Yeah. Our friend Jeremy Glick got an edition of General Giop's book on the American aerial strikes. What a find. He said the Americans like to bomb after they ate breakfast.
Yeah.
So we picked up on the pattern. It's typical Americans. They're going to eat Wheaties and then they're going to go bomb.
And then they're going to bomb.
So Giop picked up on this. Yeah. But it's true. Yeah, there's no talk about this anymore, right? In many ways, right? And yeah.
Well, yeah, I feel like the question of how or whether this this catches fire and becomes a collective movement is a pretty good place to end the group. Unless there are any final thoughts, what I will say is what everybody here on this list can expect is between now and January, February. You'll get an email with some preliminaries for whatever group we're thinking about for the spring. I'll talk to Michael about what he's planning. I know the psychoanalysis stuff. Maybe I can pair something with that. We'll see. But thank you, everybody. I hope this was worthwhile. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes.
This is my
Well,
first
thank you
time
so
in this
much, David.
format.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Michael.
Cooler and more
I
dynamic.
really appreciate it, David. It was great choice of book. And please thank Jack again. I probably won't see him. If I go to Philadelphia, I'll go have a coffee with him. But if he comes to New York, he's always welcome to connect and go for dinner on
I will.
us.
I'll let him know.
Yeah.
and thank him
So it
for
was great
showing
to
up.
have him here and talk about the book in a deep way. And to me, this follows very much in a tradition that some of us here are very accustomed to. I don't know if tradition is the right word, but countercultural thinking, if
Mm.
you will. The Deleuze-Guattari's Anti-Oedipus and A Thousand Plateaus, and of course, the breakthroughs on ideology by the French school, right? As well as, using Foucault in a very, very productive way, in my opinion. Yeah, which was really great in this regard. Yeah.
Yep. Jack's background in his one of his first publications was a collection on governmentality.
Right.
So he knows Foucault. He's also associated closely with Deleuze, as we've discussed, and the autonomists.
Right.
And so, yeah, he's written an article or two about Marx and the post-Marx
Right.
moment in cultural studies. So he really knows these frameworks. And I agree with you. I think he produced a really, really interesting analysis within those frameworks.
Right. Very
I've
good.
really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much, David and
Yes.
Michael and everybody who's here. It's been fabulous.
We're going to have
Oh,
a
yeah.
Thank you.
great 2026. We try to get smarter every day. And
One
more
way to
accurate
go.
with those smarts, right? In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, for me, this is, what it's all about, trying to build these very strong interpretive communities that we can take locally. Leslie, you should be forming study groups at this point in your neighbor. Yeah, why not? I mean,
Wow.
you need any help, we're here, to recommend books and things to do and, et cetera. Yeah, yeah.
What
Yeah.
an what
I
an
mean,
what an idea to chew on.
yeah.
Mm.
I mean, you keep yourself socialized in a good way, and
Oh yeah, because I feel pretty isolated out here.
there you
Holy
go.
mackerel.
Yeah.
In the buckle of the Bible Belt.
Yeah.
Indeed. There you go. Yeah, there you go. Well, you can talk about divine violence. That's a good starting point. You can read Walter Benjamin on the concept of violence. He has a very good notion of divine violence there. Yeah.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, I could put an ad in the local paper,
Yes, you can do that.
and
Come to a
see who
reading group
shows
on
up.
divine violence. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Not at my house, I'll tell you.
Right. Yeah. No, you worry about the torching of the house.
Good night, everyone. Nice to meet you, Jacob.
Good
Thanks
night.
for coming.
Thank you,
Right.
everybody. Yeah.
Thank you,
Happy New
everybody.
Year.
Thank you.
Probably will not meet tomorrow night due to my not only my not feeling great, but I think Bruno is also enjoying himself too much in Spain to show
Oh,
up.
good.
We will
Yeah.
definitely make it on January. I think it's the 6th or the
Ooh.
5th. I'll put out an email about it, etc. But thank you, everybody. I want to
Thanks, Michael.
continue with the
Yeah, be
campaign
well.
and the pirate care very much, and kind of make that completion. And again, and Beryl, thank you so much. I'm in a process of writing to Daniel Ross. I saw Harry Halpin, who also knows Daniel Ross very well.
Uh-huh.
Who's a good friend of Stiegler's. I saw him on Saturday on a Zoom session. Harry is very good in terms of platform. David would like this. Harry is an expert in technology as well. His PhD is in informatics, but he's got a philosophy, and he's also very much a radical in a sense. He understands this language very well, and he argues very efficiently with these people that are always promoting technology without any critical acumen. So yeah, it was great to see him. So anyway, everybody, best for 2026.
And Michael, the more you can let us know ahead of time what you're going to be reading, the better.
I will, of course. Yeah.
Great.
Well,
Okay.
this week, next week, it'll be Eva Kate. You have
Yeah.
the book, right?
Yeah.
It'll be the chapter 6. Yeah.
Cool.
Chapter 6 of the Eva Kate. But I'll put that out again. I did before. We
Great.
just haven't gotten to it. We had a good discussion about
And the title of the book, I think I have it, but I'm not sure.
well, I sent it in PDF form.
Yeah.
Oh,
I can send it
okay.
again. I'll send it again. I have it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's about her experience with her child, right? And a very interesting thing. And, I think Bruno will have some interesting things to say because Bruno has also personal experience.
Yeah.
with this, I mean, I have it in different ways. I think we all maybe have family members, etc.
Yeah.
But Bruno had one very special needs situation, if you will.
Right.
And, I think he takes to it philosophically, etc. But we've had discussion about where it becomes somewhat limited, but we'll bring that up when we, so yeah. Okay, well, everybody have a great
Okay.
New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah,
So
Happy
much
New
having
Year,
you.
everyone.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.